Okay, let's have a look at the first step of this menu, the introduction to the topic. Okay, the topic called the landscape transformations and some principles. Yes, some principles about the landscape architecture towards resilient coastal cities, the topic of today's. First of all, some understanding about how landscape architects understand NBS. Yeah, everybody is talking about NBS, and we have some definitions, but for landscape architects, NBS may be a little bit different. Because, okay, we see that and we know very well NBS are approaches using nature and natural processes for delivering infrastructure, services and integrative solutions. But for landscape architects, it's a little bit different because landscape architects by profession, by essence, are dealing with nature and environment. So from the beginning, landscape architects plan, design and manage natural and build environments. And this makes maybe the difference with the other professions. So we are used to work and build and manage ecosystem, so natural cultural ecosystems, building and changing and mitigating also climate change and climate transformation. So we are used to deal with these transformation processes. But anyway, when we are talking about NBS, we know very well every NBS is site-specific. We understand appropriate NBS based on the natural properties of water, soil, trees, vegetation, topography. So using the natural resources and thinking about the natural resources. But NBS is always part of a larger natural system. Everything interconnected. And this is what I would like to explain to you, to demonstrate that we should not think about NBS as an isolated thing. It's always embedded in a city-wide natural framework. And of course, when you're talking about NBS, it's about the result of cooperation between different professions, between different disciplines, and with the aim to achieve also high quality and multi-dimensional landscape management. Some years ago, during the World Economic Forum, it was 2016, there was a discussion about environmental risks and what is then the position of all the risks in the between probability and impact. And if we see also, if we see on the sketch all these impacts and all these risks, which are red on the scheme, we can see that they are very well, or they are all together. Yeah, between probability and impact, we are facing here very big challenges when we are talking about these risks. All these risks are interconnected. Climate change connected to sea level rise, connected to droughts, connected to fires, connected to loss of biodiversity, loss of natural or consumption of all resources. And all these environmental risks can be addressed separately, but also together. So the demonstration of today's lesson is that we need to change our mind. And when we are talking about NBS, we should use the same acronym, NBS, yeah, but not talking only on nature-based solutions, isolated based NBS, but all together into a system. Landscape is a system, city is a system, the urban fabric is a system. Why are we not talking about nature-based systems? And that would be the demonstration of today. All the NBS we are talking about, yeah, are somehow interconnected. And this landscape architects from the beginning are, well, they were some years ago or some decades ago talking about turning gray infrastructure into cultural landscapes. But today, the profession has shift sides and talk about the transformation of nature into a system, into a coherent and comprehensive system where all the elements are close together and functioning, right? So talking beyond the transformation of infrastructure, yeah, putting the nature at the center of the urban transformation, it means we talk about landscape first as the framework for urban transformation by using the the acronym nature-based systems. And here I would like to ask Haris Piplas to move on with the next slide and explain a little bit more in detail the principles of this transformation. Haris, are you here?
Thank you. Yes, Didier. Can everyone hear and see me?
Yes, very good.
Very good. I'm glad to be here this morning, and thanks to IFLA Europe and to the Revalue Consortium to share some thoughts in my position as a IFLA Europe member and I'd say activist, just like Didier and many other colleagues in our climate change working group. Happy to report a bit on some thoughts that we share in the last months and years, and also a bit something that I can reflect from applied research as I have an affiliation at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and also from practice as I co-direct the Integrated Urban Solutions Department of a large international office called Dresden Sommer. So happy to be here this morning and add to what Didier mentioned on the new paradigms in landscape and ecological urbanism. I think most of us are aware of these publications that are, meanwhile, more than 15 years old. These were paradigms that were developed also before the financial crisis that we had in 2007-8, and what brought to us the first landscape and urban, I'd say, tools, mechanisms, after realizing that we do live in a post-oil society, that we do live in a society that needs to deal with climate change. And what these publications talk about in summary is that the landscape, that's what you Didier mentioned, is should become maybe the primary medium, should be positioned at the forefront of future urban transformation. So, which means the landscape should not be any more monofunctional, as we played and also planned our cities in the 20th century in a monofunctional car-oriented way, but we have to plan the landscape, and I later will come to that. What does it has to do with landscapes in the waterfront areas and strong water relation that have to become more flexible and adaptable, offering important services to cities and the communities, and enhance social, cultural, and political, and also obvious ecological implications on construction space. So in this sense, we need to think in a multidisciplinary way to plan and design the landscape so it does not become this contextless and, let's say, unimportant green island of a city as we know it from the 20th century. So we do have to adapt our cities to the 21st century challenges, but we have also to adapt our landscapes. And in this sense, these potentials that lie in landscapes, is it the quality that they can bring to lifestyles? Is it their resources, the ecosystem services like food, water, energy that we usually have to import to our cities from distant ecosystems? Is something that landscape urbanism and ecological urbanism talks about, to rely on local ecosystem services and activate them in order to have these performative, multifunctional landscapes. And I will exemplify that in the next couple of slides. If you could go next, Didier. Is something that this slide shows that one of the approaches could be, and we are still in a phase that we do have some flagship, some pilot projects, but adding this notion of circularity to this paradigm that I showed just before, circularity in landscape architecture. On the right-hand side, you can see a position paper that we as IFLA Europe published 1.5, 2 years ago, talking about the role of landscape architecture and planning in this realm. So we now have to sort of add this another, if you want, buzzword or another paradigm. And after many discussions, what this brought up is that basically what I just mentioned before, ecosystem services, the water, energy, food flows, inherent to our ecosystems have to be thought in a circular way. So this is basically, it's now this new paradigm becomes somehow more holistic if you think it in a circular way. So in architecture, in construction, circularity is already almost not a standard, but it's already quite omnipresent. It's very often about reuse or recycling. But in this sense, what landscape architects can do, and what also hopefully many pilot cities will also be doing in the future, is to put the circularity on the level of the neighborhood where the most people live and work, right? Neighborhood scale, district scale, this is where the Homo sapiens feels safe and welcome in his or her community. So this neighborhood scale, and obviously upscaling this to the city scale. So in this sense, that's what you see on the left-hand side, this cradle-to-cradle principle, for example, that helps to think the technosphere and the biosphere in a more holistic way. There's many pilot projects, but happy to show it in some other occasion. If you could go to the next slide, please, Didier. And this is something that could be the exemplification for your project and your case studies in your respective cities. By the way, it's a very, I'd say, exciting setup of cities that you have in different climatic, different cultural, linguistic, topographic locations around Europe. And in this sense, this few collages that I'm showing in the next few minutes before wrapping up is maybe something that could inspire you to talk and think. This is also what you pointed out, Didier, to go back from monofunctional infrastructure, like defensive infrastructure, these sea walls or breakwaters or dikes, but to think about adaptive infrastructure. So how something that helps us to cope with the natural systems and natural powers of water, like here, these barrier islands or constructed wetlands, or these living shorelines you see in the reference also, and the source in the bottom right part of the screen. So in this sense, how this defensive infrastructure can be also used to restore, to construct wetlands, to create public space, etc., etc. So it becomes a social space, if you want, rather than just this defensive, hard infrastructures as we know it from the past. Maybe next slide. And there's many, many projects. This is the Nassau Bay project, thinking of, and this is very important, of course, to these adaptive infrastructure. So dealing with water is a long-term process, as we all know. Climate change is approaching, and we have to deal with that, of course, with healing, let's say, some temporary problems, but also thinking of how we can prevent long-term illnesses. And in this sense, in this particular project, you can look it up. There is I'd say, a very interesting way how these barrier islands have been reinforced, how stormwater was storage and filtrated. So I think different water flows that we have to deal with in talking about water. So it's different water qualities and different sources where this water is coming from. And in this sense, here also including these regional scales, so including the river flows, in this sense, helped this adaptation strategy for the waterfront to become a comprehensive regional resilience plan. So in this sense, it's not just a technical intervention in this particular location, it became a regional strategy, again, putting the water and the landscape, green and blue infrastructures at the forefront. of the discussion and of the construction of the implementation. So maybe next slide. And there is a way more to be shown, and I here put in on purpose two opposing slides. On the other hand, on the left-hand side, there is, many of you know this project from the wider New York area, the urban water strategy, Henk Ogwink, and as I remember correctly, the Bloomberg administration was behind that put this strategy of delaying, storing, etc., different steps of urban policy guidelines to, in this case, slow rainwater runoff, and what constructive or construction or built intervention it creates in green roofs, bioswales, etc., parkland, terraced edges. So there's a whole strategy. It's just one step. I'm inviting you to look it up. I just put it here as an example. You can, it's very well documented online, so I'm not going into detail here. But this was one of the first projects that got global, I'd say, visibility and recognition. It's more than 10 years old, and meanwhile, and how a water strategy that sometimes it's not even this attractive thing to do, but became a sort of globally a well-known project from New York City, rather than it put some, I'd say, contemporary art museum and typical built projects that are anyways in the very visible in popular media, put it a bit in the shadow. So it was a kind of a project that did create a paradigm shift, not implemented fully in New York, unfortunately, but created helped to create this paradigm shift. And on the right-hand side, it's a project I had the pleasure to be involved. This is in Trinidad and Tobago. It's also a few years back. Also looking into some of our, not romanticizing what's on the left-hand side. You see everything somehow green, blue, and almost perfect. But if we deal with water, if we deal with infrastructure in many of our countries and cities, and this is a quite, I'd say, dramatic one, I have to say, is we do have to think of this flooding risks. So of course, a huge impact on life quality and on safety and security. What socio-eco vulnerability we do have in our communities that are surrounded by water. So very often the most vulnerable live around water and live around these risky sites, which is also often characterized by lack of public space.
Maybe I can continue also with the next slide about his presentation, the connection of architecture and ecosystem. You can see here solutions developed all together as a system. The coastal solutions, in fact, where you have the dikes and also the connection of the dikes together with the sea, and the buildings and the connection of the buildings included along the sea. Along the sea coast. And the last slide, I don't know, Alison, maybe we can see, we hope that Harris is going to join us again. That was his last slide with some examples and some projects about the waterfront with dike. This is something you can see on the left, on the right is on the top, the riverfront inclusive design, where you see the nature very close to the waterfront, the smart master planning and the bottom on the right, and on the left also how canal has been transformed, becoming a promenade, and he is coming back, yes, and a promenade for pedestrians only.
So it's just a collection of some collection of projects that I had the pleasure to be working on. On the right hand side, there's a project in China that try to work on river revitalization and regeneration. Also, not forgetting the notion of placemaking, a public space, etc., etc. So you see here a few projects that done by other colleagues on including or integrating, better said, waterfronts, public space, promenades with dikes, and this defensive infrastructure. So the concrete exemplification of what we just mentioned
in theory, in concept before. And of course, many of Dutch and other colleagues know about this intelligence water management in public space, where we have these retention areas. I mean, many of us talk about sponge cities nowadays. So where a water retention area becomes a infrastructural space during flooding, during heavy rainfall. As we know, these heavy weather occurrences are going to be a unfortunate reality in our cities in 21st century. And then in this is the image you see in the bottom, in the middle, and then I'd say in normal circumstances, it is a public space used for sport and recreational functions. So thinking of here of day and night and seasonal, I'd say changes and modifications and dynamics that we have to think in our projects. And of course, here this integration of buildings and ecologies is something that if we talk about a landscape, we do not exclude the buildings and the mobility, but we think of a city in a more holistic way. Okay. I feel this is, I think, sufficient for a conclusion. I'm very happy to have a discussion this time or in the future.
Thanks,
Didier. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.